Welcome, everybody, to the Good Data Podcast. We have a great show for you today. Don Finley will be on the program. He's a software developer whose company Findustries provides consultation and development for software of all types, but he's especially working on the new frontiers of AI and blockchain, so he's kind of a hot commodity right now given the recent mania over those two. I met Don at a conference. We were on a panel together about blockchain, and when I asked him about Bitcoin, he kind of laughed. Like, we talk about that. We talk about cryptocurrency, blockchain, AI, neural nets, all kinds of super techie, super interesting stuff. Don's a great guy, and I hope you enjoy their conversation. Let's go. Don, thank you very much for coming on the program. I really appreciate that you took the time. And I know, there's a lot to talk about. We were on a panel a little while back for the 7x24 conference, and we connected a little bit on the crypto mining stuff, but there's just looking at your bio and everything, there's a lot more that you do. It's actually, I saw that you went to Ohio University.
Yeah, no, Ohio University.
I used to live out in Columbus. That's why I bring it up.
Really?
I know it pretty well. Yeah, and my brother actually went to Ohio University for film.
No way. Yeah, there's a great film program down there. And
Yeah.
I just got to say thank you for having me. It was excellent being on the panel with you at 24/7 thing. And
Yeah.
I'm glad we're having a chance to have this discussion too.
So what did you studied computer science there, or?
Yeah, it was all
Nice.
computer science. I got close to a mathematics degree as well, but really it was computer science. And I don't know if you're familiar, but computer science in some programs is all theory.
Yeah.
And so that was really my background. And then I had a focus in artificial intelligence.
Right. Well, I mean, that's as good a jumping off point as any to really get in the meat of things. So, for a long time, artificial intelligence really didn't seem like it was, at least in terms of neural nets and things like that, it wasn't really reaping the benefits that were promised. And more recently, that's come back into vogue like gangbusters, that, so many things are running on convolutional neural nets and stuff. So is that something that you are familiar with? Like, is that part of your basis is neural nets? And if so, can you talk about what they are and how they work?
Yeah, so neural nets they're derived from, or at least the name is derived from how neurons fire in our brains. And if you take a single neuron, it has inputs and then it has outputs. And what ends up happening is it collects inputs, and if they hit a certain threshold, it then fires off an output to, subsequent neurons down the line. And so essentially what it's doing is it's taking information in, making some sort of judgment based on its own little mathematical idea of how information flows, and then spitting that output. The power of it is when you combine, thousands, hundreds of thousands, millions of these neurons together, and they have various triggers along the lines of like what activates them, what doesn't, and the weights that go into that. They can find very difficult patterns and make it rather easy to resolve. So like a straight neural network, you can feed it in images of dogs, and then you feed it in an image of cat, and it will tell you that there's a difference between those.
Right.
So it's the power of it is in its model. But then if you go into like, well, how does it learn? That's kind of the cool thing. It's also a mystery, right? Like you feed things into a neural network, you get output out. We know how to judge the answer. We know how to, format the input so that it can learn better. But the way that a neural net learns is it goes, shoot in the input. You have an expected output that's your target. And then the neural network spits out an answer. And if it's close to the answer you're looking for, or it's the right answer, you can go back and figure out how the math worked to get to that correct answer and strengthen those connections between the neurons in the neural network. The same goes for if the answer is wrong. What you do is you weaken the connections that create that right answer or that wrong answer. And so what ends up happening is over time, through just, training of the network, no human intervention, it actually gets smarter and finds more detailed patterns.
That's really interesting. I have been, I went to school and I studied computer science to some extent, but I was a Java guy, and recently I've started learning Python or teaching myself Python. And one of the early lessons in the curriculum I was taking was to make a neural net. And
Yeah.
I didn't realize how little code actually goes into it. Like, you can make it very complicated, but this was just a math learning, so it was just matrix manipulation. And I was kind of amazed. It's like, there's stuff behind the scenes, but just how little it took to actually make this thing smart enough to do math equations. So is that part of the appeal in general?
Oh yeah. I mean, it's definitely like the hands-off approach to, getting a computer to solve problems. It's easy to create. It's hard to perfect. I think is a,
Right.
a good sort of saying to this. The models themselves, actually, let me take a step back. When you're creating a neural network, the model is important, but equally important, and if not more important, is how you're structuring your answer as well as the inputs. So how do you make it easy for the network to learn? And I kind of equate it to, really teaching children how to do anything. You wanna set it up in a way so that they can be rewarded for getting the right answer, and that there's, little consequences for getting the wrong answer or performing poorly in the situation. But it's more about, creating an environment in which it makes it easy for that individual or that network to learn. And so how do you set up the input? How do you set up the data so that it's easy for the computer to find the pattern? And even though you may not know the patterns are there, you can structure your solution in a way that makes it mathematically easier for the program to figure out what the patterns are.
Hmm. Well, and also finding the training set, right? That's one of the real problems today. And one of the it's I read recently that the biggest or the growing job field in AI is just figuring out how to train, like almost being a teacher of the systems. Is that something you've come in contact with too?
Yeah, no, and everybody loves to talk about like the structure of a model, or if you go into, how people are solving problems, they talk about like how many layers of neurons, what's the structure of that? Do you go like a convolutional neural network to a recurrent neural network back to like how many layers of this pattern do you go through? But being able to structure the problem up front and feed it in a way that makes it effective for the network to learn is crucial. If you go back to, essentially the core data science work that people were doing, 10 years ago, 20, 30, 40, 50, ETL jobs, the extract, transform, load. It's about understanding your data and what your data means to you, and then creating it in a way that allows you to feed it into those networks. But the cool thing is like the idea of neurons and neural networks has been around since, I think it was the early 60s, in which
Yeah,
some of the
I
first
think you're
papers
right.
were written.
Yeah.
Yeah. I may be off by 10 years one way or the other, but yeah, it's an idea that's been around, just we never had the computational power until the proliferation of GPUs
Mhm.
to be able to tackle these problems.
So where do you fit? I mean, what has your work been in relation to AI recently, or machine learning?
So we have a couple projects that we've either launched in the last year or are working on. Some deal with the prediction of price movements in securities, so like stock forecasting and creation of indicators that way.
Mhm.
We've also done work in object recognition, and then a little bit of work in OCR as well, but that's a problem that's really been solved, or solved to a good extent, in that we can take
Right.
frameworks off the shelf and use those. And then we're working on another forecasting algorithm for just-in-time, let's say just-in-time delivery of services.
Huh.
Yeah, so we're
So
taking a lot of different sensor readings from various locations and sites, and then tying that in with other sources of information, like let's say weather or job reports, to come up with predictions for when, actual physically people will have to be there in order to perform services.
How did you come up with those opportunities? Is that something that was brought to you, or is that just a segment of the market that you realized was a real important one?
So yeah, there are opportunities that were brought to us. My company, Findustries, does custom software development, and we're mostly focused on artificial intelligence and then also blockchain, which is how you and I got introduced.
Yeah, we'll talk about that in a little bit. That's that's a big one.
Exactly. So yeah, we just do really custom software, and it allows us to help out companies that either have a deep bench of software expertise and need to get into some of these technologies, or we end up working a lot with like manufacturers who may not have software expertise, but see that they need to take some of the data they have and turn it into actual knowledge for people to make decisions on.
Right. So it seems like just the AI piece, it's really a boom time, I think, for that. And it's a real difficulty finding the segment of the market and the actual how it would be helpful to get AI out there. So is there anything else that you see out there in the market that maybe you don't want to say? It's up to you. You don't want to give away your secret sauce, but applications of machine learning AI that could be a big deal. Is there anything that scares you? Is there anything out there?
Yeah, so I think I wouldn't say that there's anything that truly scares me about AI, but what's out there today and what's actually getting proliferated is areas of customer service and helping to customize different service applications for individuals. So an example of this is when you talk to a chatbot, sometimes it's a human, sometimes it's actually an AI bot, but being able to take that information and then taking the end product and being able to customize it for you. And one area I see this as being extremely helpful would be in the healthcare space in regards to being able to pick insurance for, your particular situation, but then doing it at scale to where you can always have an expert available to you, right, based on the criteria that, you've essentially had this conversation with an AI or filled out a few forms that give you a little bit of a recommendation. Where I think AI is somewhat scary, and I think this kind of plays into technology, is just how do we take anybody who has been either displaced by technology or isn't quite caught up to it, the opportunity to be retrained, either by creating corporate training programs or by some other startup / government institutes that would be able to help bring people towards a higher tech world. Like, because if you think about it, we're either going to be telling the computers what to do or the computers are going to tell us what to do.
Right.
And if we can create an AI that, helps humans learn more effectively.
Right. Tailored learning. Yeah.
Exactly. Like understanding where you're hitting snags or, seeing that information and being able to either highlight it to a human teacher or being able to help you get past that hump would be amazing.
Right. Well, so, a lot of these things, like you talk about tailoring health information and, I'm not an expert on any of this. I just am interested in it, but it seems to me that there's two different parts to the sort of AI equation. There's the algorithmic part that is more about taking data and not through a learning process, but through a sort of structured algorithmic process to get the best data out there. And then there's the other type, which is actually taking that learning data and figuring out a solution on its own. I'm not explaining that as well, but is that an interplay that you have to work with of having a system that is programmed as smart or having a system that learns throughout that? And maybe you can explain that a little bit better than I can, because I don't know if I did the best job. But
yeah, no,
can you talk about that a little bit?
I mean, you're kind of fitting into it, right? We understand that there's a step-by-step process of ensuring that your plane is ready to take off, right? And that we require that there's experts who are able to do that process and who are required to sign off on it. Now, even though that's a step-by-step kind of process that people go through, and it's something you can train an individual on, it would take I mean, it could take a significant amount of time for a computer to learn that pattern just on its own, even if it was codified in a rather simple way. But that's what the AI systems of like the 1980s, so late 70s, getting into the AI 80s, they were expert systems. And it was about codifying like human logic and their decision points in regards to how they went about decisions. And a lot of research was done into, fuzzy logic and the codification of these business processes down the lines. And that's an interesting area because I think it does sit nicely beside the work of like deep neural networks. But when it comes to image recognition or real-time detection of objects, expert systems always seem to lack in sophistication or being able to handle, a wide variety and generalize to different environments.
Right.
So I see the AI world of today and deep learning kind of building upon that foundation of what the people learned in the past around expert systems. Now, granted, I work with startups as well, and some of the things they're doing with AI have an expert systems component to it. Because what it does is it allows you to supplement the information that you're getting from like a chatbot in a deep neural net type situation with, clear definitive answers to certain scenarios that can really help reduce the training curve and increase the end consumer satisfaction from it. So it's like a mixed situation today.
Now we have to take a break. We'll be back in a second with Don Finley and Good Data. Today's episode is brought to you by Greenlane Design. Greenlane has been designing, engineering, and building critical facilities for over 10 years, from small server rooms to major data centers for Fortune 100 companies. GLD is also expert at computational fluid dynamics simulation. Mouthful. That's computer simulations of airflow in data centers. If you would be interested, go to greenlanedesign.com. Click on contact and mention the podcast. And we're back. We were just talking about the difference between neural nets and expert systems that are pre-programmed to solve a problem. And
well, it's interesting too. Some of that expert system, it may be harder to game, because I was reading recently about a few things where AI can, an aggressive attack on AI can actually very easily subvert the neural net machine learning process by something that looks innocuous. So it's actually fairly easy to attack it, even though it's like 99.9% effective. That 1%, that 0.1% is very easy to do. So is that something that you have to deal with? Or, in the case of image recognition, they can make I think it was a helicopter look like a rifle, even though to the naked eye, it is absolutely 100% a helicopter, but they have some somewhat invisible line through it that the computer detects as a rifle. So, that seems to extend on to translation software or a lot of the other sort of computer, the machine learning applications can be gamed. Is that something that you see? Is that something you worry about? Is that something that, is a trend in the marketplace to figure out ways to mitigate that?
It's interesting. I haven't seen that paper, but if you could send it to me, I'd absolutely love to read it.
Yeah, I will.
It's fascinating as far as the idea. Have you heard of adversarial gains?
Yeah.
Okay.
So, but can you explain it, please? Sorry.
Yeah, and so the basic idea is you have an artificial intelligence algorithm, and it is set to identify helicopters, right? And then you have an adversarial artificial intelligence that is feeding its input into your AI that you want to identify helicopters. And so the whole time that the adversarial bot what its goal is to trick your main artificial intelligence program. So that's what's interesting is in the scenario of like, it's a helicopter, but it's actually a rifle, or it's a rifle, but it's actually a helicopter, and like your main AI can't differentiate it. You've come up with a situation which your adversary has won. But
right.
the way that those algorithms work is when the adversary wins, it does changes on the main AI so that it no longer occurs and that it basically recovers from that fault. The cool thing about these is like they literally start as the inputs and the outputs, right? So the adversary is something like 50% of the inputs to the main AI. It's actually given legitimate images as well that it can work on. But the adversary, its main goal is to increase the number of times that it gets a false positive or create, or false positive or false negative. So just false situations inside of the main AI. And like that work, I think will definitely help to reduce the amount of times that people can manipulate various images, because we'll start to increase the subset of, or the images that are in that set, to include the ones that, you know, it's a helicopter, but it looks like a rifle to some people.
Mm-hmm.
So really cool. But then the other thing that I was going to say is a lot of, when you train an algorithm on how to like properly speak English or write English, it's not like we hand it a grammar book and say, hey, go and learn these rules, and then you'll be creative, you'll be able to identify these things, you'll write movies for us. The work being done today has identified that all of our biases that we carry as human beings, whether it's toward other nations, towards races, towards sexes, gets carried over into the artificial intelligence, because it reads our literature, it reads our work, and it doesn't assign meaning to it, but it just sees the patterns and it replicates those patterns. And so I think that's a sorry disadvantage for us to give these algorithms our own biases, especially when we're all so cognizant of being able to eliminate bias anyways. So
there was a book.
Yeah,
there was a book that came out recently by Cathy O'Neil called Weapons of Math Destruction, that I think it sort of dovetails into what you're talking about, where they found all these notions of algorithmic bias, where bad data was put in and then it's being used in the real world, and it's actually hurting people. And it's healthcare data, it's policing, there's a lot of examples of this where these machine learning systems were put into place, and then instead of helping the problem, they've actually, engendered additional bias. But they kind of can cover their ass because everybody trusts computers to a certain extent. So it kind of gives this cover like, oh, it's objective, where actually it was fed subjective data. So then it creates a subjective system. Is that sort of what you're talking about? And is
That's very well said.
Something to worry about? Okay.
Yeah.
It's a good book. It's a very good book, actually. Cathy O'Neil, Weapons of Math Destruction. Everybody should read it. I think it's one of the big deals of our time is to get over that hump.
Definitely.
But there are so many things that are out there to worry about, and it's not necessarily killer robots out there. It's also privacy intrusion based on AI. It's ways of manipulating people into doing things they might not otherwise do. So I wonder if you have any. Sorry to bring it back to the negative stuff, but if you have anything that you see in the industry that kind of worries you about the direction that AI is going.
I wouldn't say it's the direction, but the speed at which the changes will occur. Like I have colleagues in the industry, and they've been working on artificial intelligence in call centers. And so what they can do is they can take every call that's ever come into a call center and then figure out the patterns of those calls. Like, why are people calling? What was the resolution? How do we get them to that resolution? And then they can spit out changes in how calls are handled so that they can reduce the number of calls that actually get to an agent by 60%.
Wow.
And so we're talking like you could have a call center open for just a year, and this company can come in and help the organization figure out how to improve. But at the same time, your workforce is now, half of what it was prior.
Wow.
And so I think that the speed at which we'll see those things come through is going to have changes that will impact our society at a far higher level than, what's going to happen with a self-driving car. And that's also another industry. Like once we get self-driving trucks, truck drivers are it's one of the highest, I'm trying to think of the word. It's the highest number of people employed. Thank you. Right. Most employees are truck drivers, which is absolutely astounding, but I never would have guessed that.
Right. Yeah, me neither. I read that too. Yeah, it's I guess the correct way to say it, which I butcher this stuff all the time, but it's the largest plurality of jobs. If anybody understands that means that's what I'm trying to say. But yeah, it's the sort of biggest employer is truck drivers, and it's a shame that all those jobs might go away in X number of years. But also,
so I got involved in Internet of Things before it was called Internet of Things as well, which was a lot of fun. Came with a lot of headaches, but in the end, we were able to take a major Fortune 50 company and remove a third of their trucks from the street.
Wow!
So huge savings when it comes to the maintenance, gas, and just environmentally amazing savings for that company. But at the same time, we didn't have a workforce reduction because of that project. There's other work inside of that organization that needed to be done, and that was still profitable for them to be doing without immediately going and saying, we're just going to eliminate, a third of the jobs or a quarter of the jobs because we no longer have those trucks on the road. They used those resources to improve the business and grow that business instead of as a cost savings measure. And I'm not familiar enough with truck driving or with call center operations a little bit to say what would happen, but I can't see that kind of performance change as well. And so if you get a 50% reduction in calls, I could easily see a third of that workforce being removed.
Right. Yeah, it's really hard to say what the long-term impact is, because there's always space for somebody to find a job. It just might be a different job, and we don't know what sectors are going to open up that we had no idea 10 years ago or 10 years from now what that sector is going to be. So there could be a huge need for human beings soon, like training AI. That's why that's a growth sector, is because we haven't figured out as well how to get AI to train AI. Humans are still required. So it'll be really interesting. I try not to worry about it, but it's really going to be an interesting world when all these things change. And like you said, that the pace of change is interesting too. And actually, I want to use that to segue into crypto, because that's a world that changes so fast and is sort of still in its infancy. Compared, AI has been around for a long time, but crypto really hasn't been around. It has only been around since 2008, or maybe even later than that in some ways. But how are you interfacing with cryptocurrency and blockchain right now?
Yeah, so our blockchain work is mostly focused on either private blockchain applications or I'd say tokenized work. So I've kind of taken a step back from the straight crypto plays. We did an ICO last year with one company and, moderately successful. We're helping out another organization in getting their platform up after they did an ICO last year and raised some funds. But along the lines of blockchain today, I'm really interested in the use cases that can come out of that space and helping, really people retain ownership of their data, companies retain ownership of their information, and, enabling really the reduction of third parties that are involved in the transition of information. So mostly looking at we have one project that's going on with a financial institution and the spreading of research reports. And so how do they retain ownership of that information as it goes out, and how do they know where it's going? But they want to have it so that everybody else can also participate in this network of information without them being the key owner of the platform or of the tool. And so that's really where blockchain steps in, is to allow the decentralization of these applications so that it isn't, one party maintains control of everything.
Yeah, there is sort of I'm saying that there's sort of a crisis of trust. You look at Facebook and the issues that are happening there. And so that there is a real opportunity with blockchain to create trust, and to create trust without third parties. And would you mind talking about that briefly? I know that this is such a big topic, but how, especially in a private setting where it's not the public blockchain, but how does blockchain enable trust in the way that you're talking?
Yeah, and it's interesting. In a private blockchain solution, every person who's on that network has some little bit of credence of trust, right? Like, in order to be put onto the network, somebody verifies you, somebody validates that you can participate in this environment. And so where the level of trust then goes from there is, I'm no longer, I don't have one party that's responsible for maintaining the trust of the network or the trust of the transaction. The trust of the transactions in a blockchain situation is done by all the nodes involved, and that they equally are a part of the solution of maintaining the reputation of that network. And so each node, when they publish their chain and they publish their answers to the difficult problems that get faced, or to the proof of time elapsed type consensus mechanisms that we use for private chains, they allow trust to be built because there's an agreement among the parties. There isn't somebody in the center saying, this is actually what happened, and everybody just has to abide by it, even if there is dissent among the group. With a private blockchain, everything's transparent. Even though you may not see the information, you can see the result of how the transaction came to be, and that it was validated by third parties associated with those other nodes that were involved as well.
So would those generally be companies that are part of that private blockchain, or would it, in the public blockchain, it's anybody? In a
and you can
private
have
blockchain situation, it would tend to be companies or actors like that.
Yeah, we tend to deal with actors like that. And so I'm thinking one of the prime examples is supply chain management. And if you think about it like food supply, right? Going from the farm to your table, there's specific requirements that everybody in the United States has to follow as far as the tracking of that. That tracking goes from the grower to some distribution to probably another distribution point to the grocery store to your house. And in that supply chain, there's a number of points of reconciliation for that individual tomato. So what ends up coming about is you have different systems at each one of the suppliers, at the grower, at the grocery store. For anybody who has facilitated it, they have their own system that tracks the reconciliation. And so if there's ever a question of where did this tomato come from, and hopefully we never have to answer or ask that question, but it happens, and we need to have good, reliable information on this. You have to follow that tomato from the person to the grocery store they bought it to, contact the grocery store, contact the distributor that they get their tomatoes from, contact that distributor will tell you where he got the tomato from, and the distributor before that will do the exact same thing down the line until they get to the farm that it actually was grown at. With all of those points of reconciliation, there's also opportunity for failure of the system. And what blockchain allows you to do is essentially tie a token to that tomato at the time that it was grown, and when it gets passed off to the first distributor, they're taking that token with them, and then they're marking, that they handed it off to another person. So instead of I have my own system, you have your own system, we're both going to update the same ledger for where that tomato has been going. And in that type of environment, it may be a private chain, but what you're doing is you're increasing trust in the information, because not only am I seeing the same data that you're seeing, we're all ensuring that that tomato has accurate information when it gets to the next checkpoint. So like in today's system, you could have a tomato that ends up getting into, this distributor's hand, but somehow missed the last distributor's information. And so with that tomato, you might have lost the information for where it was actually grown.
So, it does seem though like there are other systems that could do that, that if people had some kind of other unified database, or probably be managed by a third party, but if there was some kind of centralized database, it could also do something similar. So what is the advantage of blockchain in that side of the situation, that there is no third party?
Yes, it's that there's no third party, and also you've simplified the steps for reconciliation.
Okay.
Because essentially, if I'm creating a transaction with you in today's world, I have to create the transaction with you and then also reconcile it with my books as well.
Right.
When you put these types of transactions onto the blockchain, you can think of it as I always have access to that data and I always own that data. So when I'm making the transaction, I'm essentially making it with myself anyways.
Mm-hmm.
So I don't have to have that off-book reconciliation to it.
That makes sense.
Yeah.
Yeah, and one of the just hearing that, one of the problems with the public blockchain is how much energy it consumes in general, that and how slow the transactions are, and because you have so many nodes on the network, and because there's so much going on, and that the algorithms are proof of work, which is just so computationally intensive. That's one of the big problems with blockchain in that kind of a situation. But if you're in a private situation, a lot of those go away. You have fewer actors on the network, and you don't need to worry about that. So, it's one of, it actually makes a lot more sense in that way.
Yeah, no, I totally agree with you. Like proof of work is computationally just very expensive. And I think, didn't you call it like proof of luck?
Oh, did I? I didn't, but that's a good one.
I'm going to give that one to you.
Okay.
Because the whole way that it works is you basically try a number, and then hopefully the hash works out that you get, a series of zeros. And you just constantly do this work, but you're just playing the lottery every single time.
Right.
And that does help, make the system secure. But what we're seeing now, and I'm working with a few partners who have, built out massive data farms of GPUs in order to capitalize on these opportunities of mining. And it's extremely cool, but I think it adds a little bit of a centralized aspect to it, which is unique. And I think there's going to be another form of centralization, like Ethereum is switching over to a proof of stake type of consensus mechanism, where you can deposit your Ethereum to validate the transactions in the network, and you receive a fee for doing that as well, which is something that will help reduce the electrical footprint as well as increase the throughput of these networks. Another interesting idea out there is a framework called Holochain. Holochain it gets lumped in with blockchain, but it's entirely different. And I'll come back to that one, because another one to touch on is what's going on with Telegrams. Well, they've raised, I think it was like $4 billion in an ICO, or no?
Wow.
It was like it might have been 2 billion or 4 billion. There's another company that also raised 4 billion in an ICO, and I think another 4 billion in an equity raise right after the ICO. But what Telegram's doing is they're looking to basically recreate the internet on the blockchain. And so their white paper outlined a few ideas for how they could go about in, scaling blockchain solutions. And it's either through, improving consensus mechanisms so that they are faster, but then also enabling the blockchain to shard and create, essentially divergent paths of an original chain that at a later date would be merged back together. And so those could help actually improve the throughput of it on a public side. Where Holochain is interesting is if you look at how blockchain creates one set of data that all the actors are actively trying to validate and prove to be the correct version. And so it's got a very data-centric approach to it. A holochain and the holochain framework creates a very agent-centric. So instead of validating, well, you are validating that the data is correct when you make a transaction and that the previous data going into that was valid as well. You're more in tuned in validating the actual agents involved with it. And so each agent carries a reputation with them. They carry, other metadata that allows you to know that this is a valid agent that you can perform transaction with. And so you and this other agent perform the transaction. And then what the network does is randomly chooses a third party that also gets involved in the transaction so that they can be that not centralized, but decentralized validation. And what this allows you to do is basically have a very flexible scaling program or profile to it, since every transaction only requires 3 parties, and yet every transaction is also, you can search and discover within, I think it's log of n steps. So it's a rather effective search algorithm as well, to the point of where your data is at.
Right, as opposed to, the number of actors that have to work through Bitcoin is, it's
exactly
more than exponential. That's really interesting. Another thing you were talking about was with AI, the need for GPUs, and then with crypto, the way that a lot of those the crypto is calculated is with GPUs as well. And I think it's really, and it'll be interesting if the current flock of coins falls away, and there are all these people with these very high-powered GPU mining rigs that then have nothing to do with them, that could then be repurposed for AI. It seems like, even today, if you were to create a coin that tokenized AI computation, you'd actually be doing something useful with those GPUs as opposed to, having them sit there and do the same hash functions over and over. So I wonder if you see there's a possibility of those two markets melding a little bit.
Oh, yeah. No, I absolutely agree with you that one of the things that's going to hurt the growth of crypto is the speed and also the electrical consumption. Right. And so, as you pointed out, people are buying up GPUs in order to mine currency. It's wrecked the GPU market. Can't really say wrecked it, but like NVIDIA stock and AMD stock is just shooting through the roof, or at least it has been over the past few years, because there is such a shortage of supply of GPUs. And I know when we're working on AI projects, if we're building rigs to do that specifically, we're paying above MSRP for used cards. That's how the shortage is really impacting everybody. But I do see it as an opportunity for cryptocurrency miners to get into distributed computing and AI, essentially running models on these rigs that they've set up after, the market for crypto dies down. And maybe that is the opportunity to create an AI currency that allows you to essentially use somebody else's computing power for that purpose, and trading it off for either hard fiat or another crypto.
Yeah, it'd be really, it would be very interesting because then you could conceivably have an artificial intelligence that is being paid money to exist. You get what I'm saying?
Yeah.
Um, it's, it does feel like, there are fewer people and there are fewer human beings involved in that transaction, which is sort of strange. It's like, oh, here's an AI literally that is giving money away. Um, yeah, I feel like there's a lot, there's so much interesting stuff that happens at that intersection. But there's still so many things that are going to change and that are hard to foresee. So do you foresee, just, I just said it's hard, but, do you foresee a kind of collapse of the coins that aren't used for a utility that just are there to do those proof of work algorithms, or do you think that there's some staying power there? For instance, uh, specifically Bitcoin doesn't really do anything except run through those SHA 256 hashes, and it's I think it was like 0.2% of global power is going to solving nonsense equations, which is sort of it's sort of disturbing. So, do you see that falling away, or do you see that there's some intrinsic value to Bitcoin?
I Oh, all right. So there's, I guess, two questions laden in there, right? Um, do I see there being the electrical consumption going away? And I would have to say that an environmentally conscious consumer is more likely to be shifting their crypto into a coin that is responsibly using the electricity. I also think we'll end up finding that there are better consensus mechanisms out there as these applications scale. And I got to give it props. Bitcoin, was originally released as a proof of concept. And here we are, 10 years later?
Right.
And it's going strong, like absolutely fantastic. Excited to see what Ethereum does. And then also what the guys at Holochain are doing, and the both Ethos and Ethereum, to see where they're taking it, because all of those projects have a lot of legs to them and can definitely shift the consumption of power and the consumption of resources away from the network. Along the lines of, sorry, I forgot the second question.
Oh,
Oh God.
I might also forget, but
Yeah,
I was
sorry.
wondering if you thought that Bitcoin has legs, and I think you already answered. That's I think
Yeah,
yeah
I
um,
think I'm kind of surprised by it, right? Like,
yeah
but I also think that I'm so close to the technology that I want to see like a better technological solution win out, whereas Bitcoin just happened to be like the first to market. And I always give people the example of like VHS and Betamax. Um, Betamax was like a far superior technology, but VHS ended up getting like the first early adopters advantage, and it
right
just ended up kicking out Betamax from the rest of the industry.
right. Yeah, it is, you get there first to market and you get name recognition, and also, the network, the fact that the Bitcoin network is so big, it's much more difficult to game
Yeah.
theoretically. May or may not be true, but it's it's just interesting stuff. So, the market that's out there is very large. Um, I somewhat asked this, but in terms of the your place inside of the crypto market, what are you excited about? Maybe in the future, what could be maybe not your next big play, but what is a big play that you see out there that's exciting? And you don't have to answer. It's okay.
No,
It's
it's
a good
not.
question.
Yeah. It's a really good question. I think in general, I'm excited to see how. I'm excited to be surprised. I think is where it's at. A lot of like the easy problems or the easy areas that um, a decentralized network helps supply chain management, some information management pieces, the ability for everybody to keep on the same page. That's great. What I'm looking forward to seeing is like, what are the non-obvious solutions? Can we reinvent social networking outside of key environments? Can we reinvent how email is handled or communication is done without having a central party that is responsible for that? I think those are the areas that will be. I'm open to really any of these things occurring and want to see it. And I think it's going to have a huge social impact on us as well. Talking with people who are deeply involved in the decentralization aspect of blockchain, they're truly driven by a social good and an understanding that they can help a lot of people. And even though it won't make them the next Bill Gates, they still want to be a driving force of that. And actually, they almost don't want to be in that situation, but they do want to add that much value back to the world.
Right. Well, yeah, I mean, just talking about crypto, a lot of people like to malign cryptocurrency because it doesn't have intrinsic value, but it can help people, especially people who are unbanked, who feel that they can't trust institutions, and people in the developing world who need a value store and can't get one. There is social good that can be done through crypto. Is there any, do you see that as well? Do you see other aspects of the world that could be, benefit ordinary people with crypto?
Oh yeah, no, I absolutely agree with that value statement that there's the unbanked, the people who have been forgotten, the shifting kind of inequality that can help be addressed by these crypto programs. I haven't given up on traditional banks and traditional avenues for that help as well. In fact, and I can't tell you the names of any of these players, but I'm working with a bank right now, and they're launching a branded checking account with a Fortune 100 company, and their target market is the unbanked and millennials. And so they're using the relationship of the Fortune 100 company that consumers have in order to help reduce the credit risk of the checking product. And so it allows them to offer a no-fee solution that is truly no fee to the consumer out there, and hopefully they can help to bring more people into our financial system. Because that just has, I wish I remembered the numbers off the top of my head, but even just having a checking account helps increase your wealth.
Right. Well, and in terms of growing, developing economies, the opportunity to actually have a stable economy, at least in terms of e-commerce, has to do with having a checking account and a way to pay for things online. And so, this really could help those developing nations and developing economies to become powerhouses. That, it's almost overnight. You have a way for people to get into having money or having value and being able to purchase things online that absolutely couldn't do it before. So I find it exciting. I really think that some of this stuff can really allow for more growth in some of those developing nations, and it's a good thing. It's a real good thing for people, and I'm bullish on that, about the ability for these things to help people. So let's hope.
Exactly. And I think you kind of hit on it though. It's that it gives it competition, right? So a blockchain solution, crypto solution in a developed country creates competition for the embedded forces. In a developing country, it gives another option. And then the other thing I touch on is with cryptos, we may not need Bitcoin in the United States, right? We have the dollar, we have everything that goes, and surrounds the dollar to protect the value of that. But if I was living in Syria, I can't even tell you what their currency is, unfortunately. But in the same light, I may not want to have my currency or my wealth tied up into something that is, almost ready to go or in control of somebody that I may not trust. And so it gives the people the power to be able to move their assets into something that is, uncontrolled by really anybody else or any other foreign government. And so that power acts as another check on the existing power structures that are today. So creating competition in this world for, where value is held and who has control of it gives, I think, people another option. What's really gotten me interested is like how ideas actually spread.
Right.
And how people are getting their ideas out there. There's a book called Trust Me, I'm Lying. I don't know if you've read it. It's by Ryan Holiday, and it was written back in like 2013.
Mm-hmm.
But do you remember a movie called Tucker Max? I Hope They Serve Beer Now. Yeah. Okay. So do you remember the news coverage that was surrounding that movie?
Maybe. I'm not sure.
A bunch of groups were basically speaking out about it because he's sexist, he's, a homophobe, and actually I don't think he was a homophobe, but I think he was just a misogynist. Yeah. And it was all about how all the coverage was how dare they show this movie? It's terrible. And what ended up happening was it all got triggered because somebody ended up spray painting one of his billboards. And then multiple people sent an email to the same blogger to say, hey, you should be covering this because we've seen it out there. That blogger covers it. And then some more people send that blogger's piece over to another publication about how they should be covering it. And then a couple of days later, it's on the news. The original graffiti was done by Ryan Holiday. He was the marketing guy for Tucker Max.
Yeah.
He created the controversy. And then just basically triggered other people to carry it on. Because as soon as it happened in LA and it made national news, people around the country then started tagging and defiling the billboards for Tucker Max. And so they started putting them in places so that it'd be easier for people to tag them. And so it just kept on snowballing into more and more news, more and more publicity, and just more and more it was more and more coverage for something that never would have gotten any coverage if it didn't have the controversy around it.
Right.
And it was all fabricated. And
well,
so
it began as a fabrication and then grew in an organic way.
But he lit a fire.
Yeah.
He lit a fire that is essentially a non-existent thing. People would have just been going on their, in their life. But he was like, I have a little bit of a budget and I need to get a lot of press. So here's how he does it. Now it comes out, he's also, after he wrote the book, or after he did Tucker Max, he went on to become American Apparel's director of marketing, in which he uses some of the same tactics. Yeah. And then while he's in that position, he also sees other people using the same tactics against him. And he writes the book as a step-by-step guide, but he also writes it under the he's like, I hope people in the industry pick this up and realize the problem of the industry and that this is just going to continue and it's just going to continue to move on in this fashion unless we address it. So, well,
that kind of dovetails into the whole fake news thing and, being able to actually source things correctly and not just via backlinks. And, it's
exactly,
figuring out what the actual original source is and is this being gamed? It's hard. It's not an easy thing to do.
Oh, it is incredibly difficult.
It's interesting that, when the World Wide Web was originally conceived, they didn't code in backlinks. So that means that, to know where something came from, you had to crawl it. And that's what Google got their power from, was crawling back and figuring out the backlinks and what linked to what. And had they just decided at that time that when you link to something, they have to know about it, the entire world would be different. Not to say better or worse, but we'd have more of a sort of semantic framework for what the web is. And right now we don't have that. We have this weird kind of, it has to be created. It's not endemic to what the framework is. And it's like, we made that one decision and now here we are, but we don't know where the content came from. And it's like, is it better? In some ways, because it's more available for entrepreneurs and it's, there's fewer requirements for it, but also, it makes it worse. So I don't know. It's kind of crazy, what one little decision like that can make and how now that's influencing like elections and, it's sort of the world we're living in is a byproduct of that.
Exactly.
Right. Well, I feel like I've taken a lot of your time, and I really appreciate you talking with me. And I before we go, I want to make sure that you have the opportunity to talk about Findustries and what it is that you do, and sort of tell us about, how you are, working in this marketplace and making changes through your company.
Yeah, no. So at Findustries, we're a custom software development agency. We mostly work with established companies that have a technology problem they may not know how to solve, or they have an idea for how they can take their existing products and bring them to another solution. So we work with working in financial services, automotive, manufacturing, and a few other industries that we've touched on, payment systems as well. And so we help these companies identify how they can take their existing product lines and bring it into a higher tech space, or by taking the information that they have there today and helping them make, I want to say smarter decisions, but that's not really, it's about them gaining more information out of the data that they have. So how do you turn data into knowledge, and then how do you act upon that? And so we help them, expand their product lines, expand their information as well. But yeah, and whether that's using artificial intelligence, blockchain, or standard run-of-the-mill web app, mobile app development, that's what we help out on. And then I'm also available to help startups in figuring out their technology path. And how they can get their products to market.
Nice. Yeah, I can tell you've got a lot on your plate, so it's it's good. It's a good thing. It's always better to be busy.
Exactly.
All right. Well, Don, thank you for talking to me. I really appreciate you spending the time. And I really enjoyed talking to you. Thanks.
Definitely, Deidre. It was a great meeting you last time, and excellent that we got a chance to catch up again. So thanks for setting this up and getting this going.
All right, Don Finley, thank you very much.
That's our show. I'd like to thank Don Finley for speaking with us, and I'd like to thank our sponsor, Green Lane Design. Remember to mention the Good Data Podcast if you talk to them. Our music is algorithmically created by JukeDeck. Still can't believe that. Just try it yourself at jukedeck.com. For Good Data, I'm Drew Farnsworth. We'll talk to you next time on the podcast.